Hello and welcome to a live university-focused edition of Crimson's podcast. Today we're asking how universities can improve student engagement without creating more work for staff. Today we're joined by Sally Brooks from the University of Birmingham. Sally's helped transform the university's approach to academic engagement. Moving beyond a compliance-focused model, Birmingham has taken a more proactive approach to identifying and supporting students before challenges become bigger problems. We're also joined by Nathan Smith from Crimson to discuss whether other universities can learn from that journey and what he's seeing across the sector. As always, I'm Mark Britton. This is live and this is the Digital Lounge. Sally, Nathan, thank you both for joining me today. It's lovely to have you both here. Sally, I'd like to turn to you first of all, if I may. Before this journey began for Birmingham, what wasn't working with student engagement at Birmingham?
Thanks, Mark. It's really great to be here, and it's a really interesting subject to be talking about. So at Birmingham, student engagement around their academic studies was basically summarised by it became an acronym, Attendance Monitoring and Reasonable Diligence, or AMRD for short. It was punitive, it was overly simplistic, and it was universally loathed by staff and by students. Students found it really punitive, they found it unhelpful, they found it really wasn't very understanding because they would just get an email saying, you have fallen below the standard, you might end up in trouble because of the code of practice, we might throw you out. And I'm paraphrasing, but that's what they understood from what they were being sent. It was a very kind of black and white process. You're not attending enough, this is bad, you need to change. It didn't deal with any of the factors of what might sit behind it. It was unpopular with professional services staff because it was incredibly administratively burdensome. We were taking thousands of students through a really unpopular process. We weren't necessarily getting much out of it. And academic staff found it incredibly time consuming, and they didn't like the feedback they were getting from their student because because they were seeing students who'd got to a certain point in the process and they felt like they were calling them in to tell them off, which nobody enjoys doing, and indeed it's fairly unproductive. One of the big challenges was that we had inconsistency, which meant that our compliance side of things, so compliance obviously was a factor, particularly around international students, there was a potential risk there that we were seeing. And we also felt like there were probably students that we're missing here that are falling through the cracks that we need to know more about. So all of those issues together made us think the time is now to change.
And it sounded like there were different approaches across the institution to some of those challenges you describe. How big a challenge was that in practice to bring that together?
Well, it was significant. Birmingham, not unlike a lot of other universities, we are split up into 5 colleges. Within each college, there are a number of schools. Within each school, there are a number of departments, and within each department, there are a number of programs. Now, in some colleges, there was a college level team that managed this, and they had their own policy. In some areas, this was managed at school or departmental level, and in some areas, it was managed at program level. So, I mean, conservatively, I would say there were probably between 7 and 15 different ways of doing attendance monitoring and reasonable diligence across the institution. Not because people were trying to make it more complicated than it was, just because people were pragmatic and were trying to get the job done. And they were like, well, this will work for my students in my area and I'll do it this way. So this meant that having any sense of what an institutional view on compliance in the first instance was almost impossible. And that was where one of our big risks were. But it also meant it was completely inequitable because we had a student, maybe in my area, so I predominantly work in arts and law, a philosophy student having an entirely different experience to a maths student or a medical student. And they would be being held to different standards, they would be having different information, and they'd be sharing it with their mates going, well, I've been told this, what have you been told? And this wasn't proving helpful, it wasn't making life easy for students. And the most important thing of all of this is about making it easy for our students. So the challenge across the institution was significant because Again, if you work in a large organisation, which essentially has federated organisations within it, there are different cultures that grow up within that, different norms, different ways of doing things. And a lot of it is absolutely based on human relationships. The fact that this person who sits in this office here does this job and rather likes doing it in this way. And when you're in a large organisation, that can lead to a huge amount of variation.
A big challenge I know the Crimson team see often within universities. I'm curious. So what prompted the shift from attendance monitoring to that more supportive engagement model that you've described?
Well, I think alongside all of the challenges we talked about, and particularly that kind of lack of popularity across the board, was also an understanding that education has moved on. Engaging with your studies is more than just showing up to your lectures, going to a seminar or a lab or a placement. And there are many, many different ways to engage with your studies. And so we really wanted to take a more sophisticated view of what we really meant by academic engagement. Because actually you can turn up into a lecture and scroll on your phone the whole time and you'll get your marked as present, but have you actually engaged? Maybe not. And indeed, if you're at home and you're watching a video replay of the lecture, I have many colleagues who would argue that you won't get anywhere near as much out of that lecture because you're not in the room, but you are engaging to a certain extent. And I think we needed to understand that engagement comes in many forms. And, as our academic leaders wanted to take a more sophisticated and complex approach to that. One of the really positive things that we had at the university was our Deputy Pro-Vice Chancellor, Michael Grove, brought together a task and finish group of staff across kind of different academic disciplines and professional services staff with a view to rethinking the whole process and asking the question, why are we doing this? Why do we do this? Is it just because someone somewhere 15 years ago said in a code of practice, students need to attend 70% of their timetable sessions, and therefore we need to hold them to that? Or is it that we want them to succeed? And we moved into this place of saying, well, actually, we hold hundreds of pieces of data on all of our students. Which ones tell us helpful things about their engagement? Which ones tell us about their potential for success? Which ones tell us about their potential for failure? And also, how do we do that in a compassionate way? Because actually facing someone with their own data can be quite a confronting thing. By the way, you've missed a few lectures, we've noticed, naughty, or we've noticed that you've missed some lectures, are you okay? Is an entirely different thing. So we completely reframed it around compassion and success on that basis.
Wonderful. Just a reminder to our audience, we are live today and I can see a few people joining us now. Do leave comments if you can on the platform that you're on today. We'd love to hear from you, and of course we can highlight questions that you might have as the audience as well. Sally, I'm going to just return back to you if I may. We see this all the time. It's a real challenge bringing people together, and as you describe, it's a very complex organization that you work within. How did you bring together academics, professional services, leadership along on that journey to change that culture effectively?
Yeah, and it was challenging. One of our massive advantages was that we'd been quite bold. I think the task and finish group that had met, and it was in summer 2025, so just over 12 months ago now, they tore up the code of practice and started again. And they drafted a new code of practice. What that created was a burning platform, because we could not just go, oh, we'll do what we did before. Because actually, if the Home Office came next week, we'd say, well, actually, that code of practice doesn't count anymore. Those things wouldn't meet any of the requirements, because the Home Office judges us on what we say we do and whether we do it. So we had a burning platform. We needed to make things different for the academic year 25-26 based on this new compassionate approach, student-centered approach, and better use of technology and automation as well, because we needed to look at the workload perspective. So this is the point at which I said, well, we can do this, but we need to get the right people into the room. We've got a short period of time, and we set aside 4 days, and we put the right operational staff in the room to design a process across all of our colleges, all of our areas, across our technical teams. So, and in particular, actually, our service innovation and automation program team, who've been extraordinary, and they've brought kind of agile IT development skills and brought them into the room. So they were part of the conversation. They weren't just brought in at the end, and we didn't give them a list of things to kind of make happen. And we spent, I think, the first 2 days with the whiteboard drafting out what we were going to do. It was really intensive, but it was incredibly energizing. We went from a place where everyone came in going, we don't really know what we're doing, to actually going, but that means we can do anything. And we can put the students at the heart of this and we can make it make sense. And that was really, really inspiring, actually. Partway through, we brought academic colleagues back in and said, right, we're thinking this. Does this work from your perspective? Because it was really important that we had academic buy-in, because they're such an important part of this. And they are the people who are there in front of the students. You know, it isn't people like me, it is them. And we made some changes as a result of that. And then through that, we did daily updates to the key leadership staff who'd been involved from across the board to give them a sense that things were happening. Things were really kind of changing. We were doing some really concerted work. And the fact, to a certain extent, that it was in such a compressed period of time and we had to do it, really kind of galvanized us and made it happen. There was no slipping of the deadline. The students were going to arrive and we needed to make sure we had a process for them.
Nathan, if I can turn to you, I mean, we see this a lot, don't we, with working with not only universities but other sectors as well. Why is this kind of alignment often the hardest part of transformation? What are you seeing in across the sector?
It's interesting because obviously, hi Sally. I've spoken to Sally before, and we've talked about the journey they've gone on at Birmingham. But I think, you know, listening to what Sally's journey, one of the hardest things, Mark, and one of the most difficult reasons, or that success doesn't always happen when you start on the journey, is getting an alignment around a vision and a common set of objectives and goals, outcomes from the leadership team down into the stakeholders that are actually going to be impacted by the transformation and the change. It's less so about the technology, being blunt. The technology, there's a lot of things you can do now. There's a lot of possibilities. It's more around actually looking at, okay, what is the change that we need to drive and why, and making sure that it's no different to any change or transformation program. How's that going to impact me, and why are we doing it in the first instance? And once you get that alignment, that whole kind of vision and sponsorship from leadership needs to be visible throughout the transformation, even on an ongoing basis as well. So that you get that advocacy when you're driving change and transformation.
And Nathan, I'll come back to you if I may. I mean, the people element's so critical. Sally talked about the amount of data that the university's got. I mean, what role do you see data and technology having in enabling that change?
Those that have been on the podcast that we're on, Mark, and that know us, we always talk about 4 pillars to successful transformation: people, process, technology, and data. With the view that AI now is just accepted that it's available to support you across all those areas, right? I think, you know, if you look at specifically data and technology, they're critical in supporting the transformation. They can help you provide insight. So, you know, you can analyze data to try and identify, you know, where should we drive change? And if we do drive the change, what do we think the benefit or outcome would be? So it helps you with that analysis, actually, and identifying where the opportunities are in the first instance. But ultimately, when you start to get in the process side of things, and actually the solutions, you know, data and technology can help with a lot of the automation opportunities, connectivity, and even intelligence now. And I'll use intelligence in a supporting way, because it, you know, we've always known data can provide insight to us through reporting, with a view that humans can then sort of go in and start to analyze that data and use the tools to manipulate the data and try and massage it and, you know, work things out. But now I think if you look at sort of machine learning and agentic AI being more prominent, it's not that, you know, for those in the technical world, know machine learning has been around for a long time, but I think it's the agentic AI aspect of that now. It's what assistance can we get, and at what speed can some of these activities actually be done in that space. So I think, you know, they are very important, but I know, Sally, you've been talking about, and Mark, you alluded to it, they are really sort of, you know, catalysts rather than they are the transformation themselves. They support it. They're very critical in regard to what's needed, but you have to look at that people and process side as well if you want to be successful.
Mm. And Sally, does that echo the experience that you've seen so far?
Without question, yeah. And I think you always have to start, as with any kind of major project, any strategy, you have to start with what actually are you trying to achieve here? What's your objective? Start there. And, you know, if you know what you're trying to achieve, you can then go, okay, so what data do we have? How does that align with what we're trying to achieve? And how can we use technology to make that work practically? One of the things that I think was really helpful for us, as I spoke about before, was that the development team that we worked with, I made the mistake of making too many assumptions. I said, well, ideally, we'd like this to do this, this, and this. And obviously, that's not possible. And they say, no, it is possible. But actually, Sally, have you thought about it like this? Because you need to think about it in a different way. But their feedback to us as a wider project team, and this is not something I've done single-handedly. This is something that 20 to 30 people across the institution have been part of. What they've said to us is the reason this project has been so successful, in comparison to some of their other projects, is because of the people and process side. So Nathan's absolutely right. The technology and the data is really important, but actually the people and the processes are critical too. And we need to bring all of those together. And then you do end up with something that is greater than the sum of its parts, potentially, if you're lucky.
And just thinking about the volume of data that you've got, and going from that sort of monitoring approach to that meaningful engagement, there's some suspicion, I suppose, from certain quarters around data and monitoring and surveillance almost. How do you overcome that? And I'd be interested in, Sally, your perspective on that, and where you're seeing that kind of push back a little bit as well, Nathan, from other universities.
Yeah, I mean, I can. One of the things that we've done that I think has really helped us at Birmingham, in a separate piece of work, we have what's called the personalised learner platform. So this is essentially a dashboard that any student can see with data about themselves on it. And it gives data about their attendance, about how much work they've handed in, how many lectures they've watched on video streaming, what their marks are like at the moment, what engagement they've had with Careers Network. But also academics can see that too. So what the beauty, I think, of this is that when an academic says, oh, I can see that you've got, your attendance is this, or I can see that you've handed in loads of work in the last month, or I can see this. Actually, none of that is a secret. The student has access to it too. And so we're trying to take our students on a journey where they become more literate about their own data, and they take responsibility for their own data. Because one of the challenges that we had in years before we had this, and this has been rolled out, this is our third year of rollout of what we call the PLP, as we call it. But before we had that, when we contacted students about attendance rates, when it was purely about attendance, they would say, well, I can't see that data. You show me the data, prove it to me. And why are you monitoring me anyway? And we still do get a little bit of that. We still get people saying, why does it matter to you what I do? I pay my fees, I do what I do, go away. Fine. But actually, increasingly, students are more engaged with their own data, and that's helped with that conversation.
Transparency then, Nathan, that's the name of the game here for everybody. And increasingly, as we turn more to AI, that's, I'm assuming, going to be incredibly important as we move forward.
I think transparency, but Mark, with transparency comes security. An accuracy of information. I think the bit, Sally, you've touched this on a couple of points you've raised, and Mark, there was a very interesting conversation with another university literally in the last week around this. I think if you take the student experience element, take what Sally's talked about the process that she went through with colleagues at Birmingham, it was sort of taking a step back and making sure they sort of looked at the big picture. And I think this is, for me, when you talk about monitoring and reporting, there are lots of different teams. Whether it be academic or professional services at a university that support across the student journey, whether that's pre-applicant, applicant, or in life when they're studying with the university themselves. And I think Sally mentioned there monitoring. Looking at attendance. Looking at attendance data can give you one view, one lens, which in its own right could be quite helpful. But you've got to look at it in the context of the other data you collect and actually where that student actually is as part of that journey as well. And I think that what was interesting, it's the university in question was basically looking at the student journey and looking at the cross teams and the cross functions that interact at different elements of that journey as well. And each team had their own kind of SLAs and measures, and they're all going, yeah, well, we're hitting ours, but collectively, is that actually providing the experience you want back to that student? And I think this is the time. It's sort of moving away from how do we work in silos back to let's focus back on the student, the experience we want to provide as a university, the operation, back to what Sally was saying, and then look at the outcome they want to go and deliver, and make sure that we rethink and realign to that, rather than just looking at, because the data is telling you what you're doing today and what you're monitoring today. So it's trying to look at it and shift in that way, and then look at the data and go, yes, it's fit for purpose for doing that, but actually collectively, what does that give us if we look at it through a slightly different lens, such as student engagement from a university perspective? Yeah.
So it strikes me, Sally, that that this process is very student centric and putting student experience at the core of what the university stands for. What outcomes are you seeing so far for both students, but also for staff as well, with all of the time and investment that you've put into this project?
Well, to start with, we've definitely had a significant improvement in student feedback. This was, as I say, it was universally loathed. Nobody had a good thing to say about it, certainly not students. I think at every student rep I ever met talked to me about how much they hated it and how much feedback they got from their cohort, that nobody liked these emails. So that stopped. That completely stopped. We still had the occasional complaint or gripe come in, and that's inevitable, of course, because we are sort of saying to somebody, you know, hi, how are you doing? We can see you're not really attending. Are you all right? Do you need to speak to wellbeing? And there are still some students who find that quite a threatening thing to receive. But what we'd done, because we'd taken a more nuanced approach, because we understood the data better, we'd reduced the number of students who were being pulled through into getting any of these interventions by about a third year on year, because we found that there were just lots of them that we'd contacted in previous years that we should have just left to their own devices. They were doing fine. But what that meant was that we had more time to spend with those students who really needed us. We managed to reduce academic workload by about 29%. And our administrative workload is harder to calculate because of the huge variation there was. But in some areas, you know, there was a self-report of around 20% workload rate. But I know that some other areas have talked about cuts in workload around 40% because we automated so much more and we did so much more data analysis through various reporting functions rather than essentially people putting formulae into spreadsheets and going through line by line. But I mean, the crucial thing for me is that a lot of the anecdotal feedback we had from our wellbeing colleagues was that we found that students who were at risk were being highlighted sooner than they were before. And potentially that meant that we were able to support them to complete their studies rather than getting to the point where they were so disengaged and they had so many challenges that they had to take a leave of absence or withdraw. And for me, that was one of the really big advantages, because ultimately that's what we wanted. If you're having trouble, we want to hear from you so that we can help you out.
And I think it's interesting when you cite sort of the savings in admin time, etc. It's those sort of stories that bring it home, isn't it? I think you can free up people's time so they can work on more complex cases, for example, which sounds great. Are there any sort of standout examples you've got of what this has meant for somebody?
Yeah, I think in fact I've got it here. I've got a quote from a student. We did some really in-depth kind of work with students, asking them that had been involved to see what their feedback was on it, and we're going to use that to make it better for next year, because it wasn't perfect. We definitely need to do things to make it better. But one student said the email felt very non-threatening. So this person had just had an email saying, "You're okay. We noticed that things have dropped off a little bit," which I appreciated, as my attendance was due to family issues at the time. I appreciated that they checked in without making me feel like I was being threatened or doing something wrong. It felt like they actually cared. For me, that really meant a lot, because all of the people working on this project, and indeed, I don't think you meet anybody who works in education who doesn't care about their students and want them to do well. But I don't know that we always successfully communicate that well, particularly not through administrative processes. And the fact that with this particular student, we'd done exactly that, made a significant kind of, for me, that felt like we're doing the right things here, and the more we can do of this, the better.
Wonderful. That's a lovely example. Sally, what lessons would you share with other universities with the process that you've gone through?
I think it doesn't need to be perfect first time. The big message I said to everybody in that room, where we had 4 days early September last year, I said, we're not going to solve every problem. This isn't going to be perfect. There are going to be things that we think will work that don't work, and we have to amend in year, which we did. So pragmatism was the word that I repeatedly went back to, particularly with colleagues who were like, yes, but what if this happens? I think also don't be afraid to do things at pace either. I think particularly, you can get into a place of being quite risk averse, of saying, well, we need to pilot it, we need to try this, we need to, do some more checks. And actually the best way to try something is just do the thing. And I guess if you've got the right people in the room, it's amazing how much you can achieve in a really short space of time if you've got a really compelling narrative and a clear objective in mind. And I think the final thing is not everyone will be delighted with what you've done. There will be colleagues who will prefer it the way it was. There'll be colleagues who don't like the fact that they've had to change how they work. And I think it's about, we've worked hard to get alongside those colleagues, but, inevitably change is difficult for people, and you have to kind of weather that as well.
Yeah, I think, Nathan, I'm sure you can echo that. I mean, what Sally's describing there, work at pace, just do it, get the right people in the room, have a clear objective, and be brave as well, because you've got to accept people don't like change. I mean, what do you feel, Nathan, institutions should focus on when approaching transformation? You see it a lot.
Yeah, to be fair, I'm just going to echo pretty much what Sally said and what we said earlier on. I think it's really key that you get that alignment on the outcomes. Look, working in a kind of agile way, getting that buy-in is great if you can get stuff going and you can build stuff, but you need the right leadership and mindset from the team members that are involved in that process. Because again, it links back into the success of the transformation and change. I think, a lot of people can, as long as they're aligned on the outcomes and what you're trying to achieve, and they understand what it means to them and what they're passionate about. So again, it's interesting listening to Sally when you talk about outcomes. So I'll be a little bit I use stereotypes here. So I do apologise if there's any CFOs or COOs on the call. But ultimately, you think of those types of individuals, and it's right. How can I save money or drive efficiency and productivity? But you've got a lot of colleagues that sit across, again, academia and in professional services, that actually are sitting there going, I care about the student and I care about the outcome. And you have to link in and understand all of those, because you've got to link that into that shared outcome framework that everyone's looking at to go, right, this is what we're trying to improve. Okay, you then have to link in the kind of experience of the people that are involved in there. So again, you have to consider not just the customer, the student, or it could be industry partnerships, or you've got to look at the colleagues that are actually working in that space. And I think that for me is fundamental, because it helps when you drive the change through. Back to Sally's point, not everybody gets exactly what they want, right? But pretty much, I can guarantee that actually, I don't think I've known anyone that's ever got everything they've always wanted. But ultimately, I think if they understand the kind of greater good and what you're trying to achieve, and they can see that is coming through, and they might be getting some of the things that they want on that process, there's a much better feel-good factor around the success and how that's being driven, and the acceptance that, we don't like change, but we understand why it's coming. Yeah, and what's happening. But to do that, I think, Sally, just listening to you and Mark, seeing where other universities are being successful around this, I think it's starting well, getting those foundations in, but making sure you've got those feedback loops in as well as you're going through the process. So even if you're delivering in a very agile way, great, I've delivered the technology and there you go, off you go. It's still continuing to speak to the end users of that, or the people that are actually going through those experiences, whether that be a student, whether that be a prospective student, whether it be someone in academia or in professional services. It's keeping that feedback loop in there, because you want to find out if there's things that are working, not quite working, things that could be improved. It just comes back down to continuous improvement and change. But to do that, you need that alignment up front around the vision and the outcomes that are shared, because again, look, it's always hard, right? You're taking everybody on that journey to your point, and people will go through different variations of how they, mood and how they feel about the change. But I think if you can get that collective view of this is why we're doing it as a university, and it's going to help and add value in these areas, and you can measure that and demonstrate that, it just helps when you're driving that change through successfully. And it's interesting, Sally, I know we talked before around this, a lot of the stuff that Sally's talked about doing and how they've approached this. Yeah, technology is involved, data is involved, we said they're critical, but that's not what the transformation was led with, right, at all.
Wonderful. I'm going to leave it there now because I know we're coming up to time. Sally, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your story. It's wonderful to see what University of Birmingham's been up to, and we wish you all the success for the new academic year. And I'm sure your that student experience will continue to evolve. And also Nathan, thank you for joining and sharing your views on that as well. So I'm going to leave that there for today. I think the takeaways are about bringing people, process, data, and technology together, so it's all working together to help with that student engagement and better data. That's what we need. That helps identify and support students earlier, and small changes can deliver a measurable impact. What did Sally say? I mean, it's about pace. Just do it, getting the right people in the room, having those clear objectives. I think those are all lessons that we can take away and apply. I've got a QR code on the screen at the moment. We do have a newsletter that you can join. Where we update you on such podcasts. We always love to hear from viewers. You tell us what you'd like to see on the podcast, and we're always excited to bring on guests from both the university sector, but also we work in housing and councils as well. We're always excited to hear what they're up to too. So I think that's it for me today. Thank you for joining us on the Digital Lounge, and I dare say we'll see you very soon again. See you soon. Bye.